Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read another chapter out of Squeaky. This chapter is called The President's Button. Dick Walker had given Phil Sheldon a broad mandate. I want you to know what's the defense. Walker said. Sheldon was an interview all witnesses known and unknown, talked to law enforcement personnel who might have had contact with Lynn, and most of all, get to know Squeaky. Sheldon sketched out his investigation plan to typically methodically fashion. He kept two pads of paper listing the tasks to be accomplished. White for within 4 weeks, yellow for afterwards. He sent out to reconstruct Lynn's thoughts and actions in a 5-day prior to the pistol incident, and especially on the morning of September 5th. But despite the high profile of the case and the relatively generous resources that were available to the federal defender as a result, the investigation had been going well. Sheldon received virtually no cooperation from people who ought to have been sympathetic to Lynn. No word from her parents or siblings, and not even from another member of the Manson family. Only Charlie, who sent Sheldon a rambling, useless letter, and of course Sandy seemed to take interest in Lynn's predicament. On the other hand, one unlikely source did agree to be interviewed, Vincent Bugliosi. Sheldon put a tip to Bugliosi's Los Angeles offices on a yellow pad, a top priority with Manny Borrow, but the nervous old man brushed off Sheldon's inquiries with curt monosyllables. He would only answer the question definitely. Did Lynn steal the gun? No, said Manny. Lynn, who respectfully called him Mr. Borrow, wanted to speak to Manny herself. She told Sheldon without wrecking the old man's car. It still seemed to bother her, like the daughter wrecking her dad's car, Sheldon thought, but Manny would not come to the jail to meet with his old friend. Lynn blamed the prosecution and the press for Manny's reticence. He had ruined his reputation in Jackson, calling him her sugar daddy, a description he doesn't fit at all, she maintained. They were claiming that he had no concern for him, and we are using him. He might be so insecure that he might believe this. He is a very shy person. He feels intimidated, especially by authority, she said. Sheldon seemed to be gaining Lynn's trust. She nicknamed and imposing the detective the Whale, and their interviews remained far afield from the events of September 5th. After listening to one of Lynn's diatribes about the consumer culture, Sheldon joined his client by calling her a materialist. Lynn insisted that she was an anti-materialist. No, said Sheldon, that's a misunderstanding. Materialists are people who believe in long-term functionality and minimal items, not the short-term functionality of many items. Sheldon was towards teaching a course in Marxism on the community college, began an exegesis materialism, capitalism, and communism, which Lynn eagerly lapped up. On another occasion, Sheldon tried to move conversation closer towards the case and asked him why she had a gun. Lynn said she thought the weapon was beautiful. Sheldon quickly agreed. The pistol with pocket watch, such instruments, the detective said, possess the sterile beauty of certain things mechanical. I can't imagine you being interested in weapons or carrying a weapon or doing things with a weapon, Lynn said. Well, I have this interest in weapons. You might be something like yours, Sheldon said. There's something about the precision of them. There's something about the fact that with such a little action with my finger, I can do so much. In the principle of the lever, lift the lever here at this end and at that end, and while it doesn't move much, it moves great weights. And that's the principle of all children's toys. Lynn considered the concept amusing, the gun as toy. Well, Sheldon quickly added, I don't want you to take that seriously. I don't think a gun is a children's toy. I'm saying it's an exaggeration of the principle of what makes children happy. A small amount of effort yields a big payoff. That's the idea of behind toys. Sheldon segued into the discussion of one gun in particular, Lynn's Colt 45. How did this toy work? How many pieces of it came apart? Lynn explained how to operate the pistol, how to load and remove the magazine, how to place her thumb on the clip release, how she said she had been shown how to arm the gun, but lacked the strength to do so, and thus hadn't. She had told about the precautions that took to keep the weapon safe, such as storing the ammunition separately from the pistol and keeping the gun buried near the house. Sheldon also inquired gently about Lynn's drug use. How often had she taken LSD? About 10 times, Lynn replied. Sheldon double-checked with Sandy. Oh, no, said Sandy. They'd taken acids thousands of times. For the most part, the discussions yielded little of immediate use to Sheldon. Talking to Lynn was, Sheldon later said, like having a conversation turned in on itself. It wasn't just a solipsism because it never made as much sense as a solipsism makes. Meanwhile, Sheldon came to suspect that he had been sandbagged by the feds early one morning when the streets were empty and the mist was streaming from the ground. Sheldon emerged from a house where he had been checking on a lead. He got into his car and closed the door. Moments later, he heard 8 slams in rapid succession. He looked into the mirror and saw 8 identical cars and their doors closing. The driver, Sheldon thought, looked like FBI agents, doubtless part of the 100-man team investigating the Frommie case. He assumed he was being followed and only spotted his tail because the streets were so vacant. Years later, Lee Latham would deny that the FBI had put Sheldon under surveillance. He was less dismissive of another of Sheldon's claims. The government offices had been burglarized during the investigation, and that files released from the Frommie case had gone missing. Although Sheldon never was formally accused of doing the job, a member of the prosecution team who was friendly with Sheldon told him that he was under suspicion. We assume that it was you because you're clever enough to get away with it. Was what? The official asked. Sheldon denied any involvement. Not to mention the break-in that was made to the press or included among Department of Justice files under the Freedom of Information Act, but asked if authorities had suspected a break-in, Latham acknowledged, I think that's safe to say, and then added, but I wouldn't want to confirm it for you. For Sheldon, the worries kept growing the longer he stayed with the case. He recalled that one afternoon while driving his Volvo north from Sacramento on Interstate 5, a blue-green Ford Mustang Mark III pulled up alongside him and braked to match his speed. The window was down and Sheldon could see 4 men in the car. One of them, in his 20s, leveled a snub-nosed revolver at Sheldon and fired. Only by slamming on his brakes did Sheldon dodge the bullets. The Volvo fishtailed and it screeched to a halt. Sheldon then gunned his engine, got his Volvo up to 110 miles an hour, took the first off-ramp, and drove straight to the highway patrol. This incident was obviously unsettling, and despite the immediate suspicions, Sheldon grew to doubt that it was related to the Frommie case. It's no doubt Jungian, he said. Now he says, it just happened. The defense was not alone in its misgivings about the case. In Washington, top officials of the Ford administration watched nervously as prosecutors were barely moved ahead with the case that, if botched, he would be highly embarrassing to the president. The head of the criminal division, Assistant Attorney General Richard L. Thornburg, reminded Dwayne Keyes that we have followed closely and we are keenly interested in the case against Lynette Alice Frommie. Although the Sacramento prosecutors had managed to keep Lynn in jail prior to trial, the superiors in Washington were not impressed with the way the case had been handled. In a confidential letter to Keyes, Thornburg, a future attorney general under President George Bush, criticized the first formal act taken in the case, the drafting of the indictment. Like a law professor grading an exam, Thornburg wrote that the wording of the indictment may be subject to a defense objection, turning on its failure to include a brief statement on the act continuing the contempt. Fortunately, he added, the sloppy drafting might not be fatal. A recent Supreme Court decision made it likely that the government could successfully resist the motion to dismiss. Thornburg had another far more serious concern that the evidence developed by the government was too weak to guarantee a conviction. From our review of the initial FBI report, it appears that the primary thrust of the defense will be to argue that Ms. Frommie did not intend to shoot the president, but rather was simply seeking publicity. The defense, Thornburg predicted, will point to the fact that no round was chambered in Ms. Frommie's pistol and that she allegedly is well trained in the use of weapons, of this type involved. The government evidence opposing this contention and establishing the requisite element of intent to kill the president appears to be relatively strong. However, it does not appear that the government possesses any one piece of credible evidence which is absolutely conclusive on this issue, of which provides virtual certainty of conviction. Accordingly, if Ms. Frommy's testimony on her own behalf is persuasive, and if she can present credible, independent evidence of her facility with weapons, it would appear possible that the government would encounter some difficulty convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt of her intent to kill President Ford. Emphasis added. It got worse. Thornburg staff had pored over the law books to see if a lesser offense, assault, could be deemed, including within the single count against Lynn. Unhappily, Thornburg wrote, case law in Sacramento Judicial Circuit made it doubtful that the government could obtain an instruction on assault because of its additional element relating to apprehension of harm by the victim. Thus, if Lynn could persuade the jury she was smart enough to chamber around in a Colt 45 had she wanted to, the fact that she hadn't could result in a total acquittal. Lynn, with her X-scarred forehead and her crimson hood, would walk out of the court door free as a bird. The image of the Manson family besting the Ford administration would hardly build confidence in this particular presidency. We're going to leave it here right now and discuss more of Thornburg's case of the presidential button tomorrow and another day. If you think there's any truth and like in what I'm saying here, please like and subscribe and share, and have a nice day.